At the annual Victory Day parade in Moscow, President Vladimir Putin claimed the West has unleashed what he called a real war on Russia. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, marks Europe Day by visiting Kyiv for talks with Volodymyr Zelensky.
Anti-government protests in Serbia as anger grows after last week's back-to-back mass shootings.
Israeli airstrikes kill at least 9 people in Gaza, including 3 Islamic Jihad commanders and members of their families. In his speech at Russia's annual Victory Day parade, President Vladimir Putin has tried to portray his country as the victim of the West after his illegal invasion of Ukraine. At a scaled-down version of the ceremony, he referenced the 14-month-old conflict and attempted to draw parallels with historical events, promising victory.
Сегодня цивилизация вновь находится на решающем переломном рубеже. Против нашей Родины вновь развязана настоящая война. Но мы дали отпор международному терроризму, защитим и жителей Донбасса, обеспечим свою безопасность.
Russia invaded Ukraine on February the 24th, 2022, claiming it was a special military operation to prevent a Ukrainian offensive against Donbass separatists. Later, Moscow insisted it's more of a global conflict with NATO and the collective West. The United Nations has so far confirmed over 8,700 civilian deaths in the conflict, while the actual figure is expected to be considerably higher. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen marked Europe Day by visiting the Ukrainian capital Kyiv on Tuesday for talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky. The 27-nation bloc traditionally marks peace and unity on May the 9th. Overnight, Russian attacks on Kyiv prompted the US ambassador to Ukraine to take a swipe at Moscow. She said, as Ukraine, Europe and the US commemorated victory over tyranny, Russia marked May the 9th with more missile and drone attacks on sleeping civilians. Russia traditionally celebrates Victory Day on the 9th of May to commemorate the defeat of Nazism in the Second World War. Ukraine usually does the same, but President Zelensky has now proposed establishing May the 8th as a day of remembrance instead, distancing the event from Moscow.
Police officers in Serbia are being deployed to all 1,800 schools in the country as pupils return to regular classes after last week's mass shootings. More than 2,000 officers are being assigned to patrol in and around school buildings. President Aleksandar Vučić has also demanded a 90% reduction of firearms in circulation.
Mere su takve da mi od sutra uzimamo nelegalno oružje, kod koga ga pronađemo, a taj ne dostavi. Imate mjesec dana rok da dostavite policijskoj stanici nelegalno oružje i nelegalnu municiju.
Bez posljedica.
Bez ikakvih posljedica. Niko vas neće pitati ni odakle, ni kako, ni šta. Samo donesite i ostavite.
Since a 13-year-old boy opened fire on his classmates and a shooting spree by a 20-year-old man last week, there's been growing public anger against the government. There are calls for ministers to quit and for closure of state-controlled mainstream media that promote violence and often host convicted war criminals.
Postoji potreba da se iz korena menja ceo sistem, pa i sistem obrazovanja, zato što sam majka 2 učenika i želim da oni žive u neko bolje vreme nego što smo mi 90-ih i 2000-ih i danas.
Čitavu atmosferu, klimu, što bi se reklo, to je stvorio sistem, odnosno konkretno prvi čovjek je glavni inicijator ove srpske nesreće.
Serbia has the highest level of gun ownership in Europe, with roughly 39 out of 100 people owning firearms.
The Israeli military said it struck Islamic Jihad targets in the Gaza Strip early on Tuesday, claiming 3 militant commanders and members of their families were killed. The Palestinian Health Ministry said at least 9 people died, including a number of children. Local media reports the strikes hit the residences of senior members of the group in the southern city of Rafah. Islamic Jihad, which is smaller than the dominant ruling Hamas movement, confirmed that 3 of the group's commanders were among the dead. The latest attacks come as tension boils between Israel and militants in Gaza. Israel has been conducting almost daily raids to detain Palestinians suspected of carrying out attacks on Israelis in increasing violence in the occupied West Bank. In anticipation of rocket attacks in response, the Israeli military told residents within 40 kilometres of Gaza to stay close to bomb shelters.
Smoke rising above Sudan's capital, Khartoum, as talks between the country's warring sides stall in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. At least 481 civilians have been killed in the city since fighting began last month. Some 5 million people are barricaded in their homes. Many have survived 4 weeks without water, electricity, or enough food. These people are queuing for what little bread is available. Those who've made it out are still in need of care. At the Sudanese border with Chad, hundreds of refugees are also queuing to receive supplies. The UN says it needs $445 million to fund vital support, and that's just to enable those displaced by the fighting to survive through the next few months. A relief cargo slated for Sudan is loaded onto an airplane in Dubai. It's a start, but the UN says the humanitarian situation in and around Sudan is tragic. It's feared there'll be no progress with the peace talks, while both sides consider themselves capable of winning the battle.
The bodies of 27 victims of Peru's worst mining disaster in decades have been taken to the local morgue ahead of burial. On Saturday, a fire broke out, filling the gold mine with black smoke. The local government said an electrical short circuit sparked the fire in the southern region of Arequipa. Officials said the miners were working around 100 meters below the surface when the blaze broke out. Peru is the world's top gold producer and second largest copper producer.
Scandals, ideological lurchers, suspicions of cronyism. The image of the Greens as a synonym for coherence and honesty in the German political landscape is crumbling. Robert Habeck, the Minister for Economic Affairs, has been hit by accusations of nepotism against his number two, State Secretary Patrick Greichen, who gave a well-paid post to a close friend. Amid criticism from the opposition, Habeck and Greichen acknowledged that there was an error of form, but not of substance. In a tweet, the Conservative opposition leader said, "Official clientism and nepotism may be corrected, but the damage to our country will not be repaired so quickly." The opposition's also attacked legislation passed by the government to ban individual gas and oil heating in new construction. In a statement that betrays his doubts, the Minister of Economics has indicated that it's likely to come into force later than originally planned. Many Germans are also angry about the fulfilment of an historic promise, the shutdown of nuclear power plants. In a context of energy shortages linked to the war in Ukraine, many politicians and citizens would prefer to prolong the power stations' lives. A few months ago, the government gave the green light to the controversial exploitation of the Lützerath coal mine in a gesture that did not please their ideological bases. The polls revealed that if elections were held today, the Greens would have about 16% of the votes and could cede their third position to the far-right AFD.
Le mouvement, dans sa dimension politique, a échoué, c'est-à-dire le renversement du régime islamique. Mais dans sa dimension culturelle, en un sens, il a réussi. Il a révélé, en quelque sorte, la crise majeure de légitimité de ce pouvoir.
In Iran, acts of civil disobedience are a daily occurrence. Since the death of the young Kurdish woman Mahsa Amini last September, Iranians continue to protest. But in the face of brutal government repression, this resistance has been forced to adapt.
Iranians, they have taken a step back and have stopped the very open protests that we saw at the end of last year. There is still the potential for a major uprising inside Iran. It's by no means over.
Today, the Cultural Revolution is entering a new phase. Its impact on the current regime could be major in the long term.
Il y a un nombreux groupes politiques et d'opposition qui se sont déjà formés. Ils ont besoin visiblement du temps pour essayer d'entendre les positions des unes des autres et essayer d'aller peut-être vers une coalition pour éventuellement le renversement du régime ou le changement du régime.
Internationally, the brutal crackdown on the protests has caused a major reaction.
So what leaders in EU countries, but also the United States, they have done over the past months is sanction individuals that are responsible for the crimes committed, for the human rights violations committed inside Iran, which means their assets inside the European Union have been frozen and they are banned from entering the European Union.
But for some, the reaction has been insufficient.
Ces sanctions sont très, très timides. Ces résolutions des puissances européennes et états-uniennes sont très timides encore. Et la raison principale peut-être est que pour l'instant, il n'y a pas encore d'alternative acceptée par la majorité des contestataires.
Some say the sanctions are ineffective and the international community's interest has declined.
La guerre en Ukraine, si vous voulez, mobilise totalement les États occidentaux contre la Russie. Et par conséquent, l'Iran devient un enjeu en quelque sorte secondaire.
But the anger is still there. Experts say it's only a matter of time before a new wave of protests begin, and with that, potential for change.
The countdown of the regime started from the day they killed Massa, but it's just a question of how long time it will take. Iranian regime doesn't have any future, and I think they have acknowledged it, and I think the world should also acknowledge it.